But first of all, thanks for being here. I know that a day like today, a nice rainy day on a Friday, you could have chosen to do a lot of other things. But the fact that you're engaged in trying to understand how we can all help each other be better leaders, share ideas, and ultimately make sure that our workforce is better than it was when we left it the day before. One of the things that I want to make sure we kind of set as ground rules today is the place that we're coming from, and we're all coming from probably slightly different places. I know that we've got some HR folks in the room, and we've got some folks that lead business units, and so I think we'll go through a lot of topics today, but I think the starting point is a good one. And so for me, the starting point of my background is I was a finance guy by education, and I always bring that up because I truly believe that regardless of the role that you're in, we all need to have a business focus. And I was an analyst at Kohl's department stores for about a year when I was 22 years old. I think I probably wasn't that good at it, if I'm being honest. I was okay, but sitting and looking at spreadsheets all day was challenging for me. And I got asked to go on a college recruiting trip. Now they ask recent alumni, hey, can you go back and recruit? I did that, and I came back, and the next day there was a voicemail. Remember that when the light was blinking for some of you that are old enough? And it was the head of HR, and he said, come see me. I was like, that's not good. And long story short, he asked if I would come help them do college recruiting as my next role. And I did. And fast forward 20 years, I did a whole bunch of leadership positions at Kohl's department stores, ultimately leading human resources for the company. And I was really fortunate because I felt like I got to work at 4 different companies during that 20 years. You know, there's not like this precise cutoff, but I was there when, you know, we had 150 stores and we were just trying to figure out life, and it was just explosive growth. And then there was this stage of like, all right, you kind of have to be a mature company and you have to set up some processes. And so there was that kind of maturity phase, and I got to see some of that. And then there was this next phase of, man, we're kind of spending a ton of money and our processes aren't really working. We have to start now refining some of those processes. And then towards the end, it was like, well, who do you really want to be when you grow up? Because we have 1,200 stores in 49 states and 130,000 employees, and just in human resources there was 350. And so now you're at this, who do you want to be when you grow up? So I feel really fortunate that I got to see things through a very different lens. But the reason I bring that up is I think all of us are going through some sort of change, right? If I were to ask for a show of hands, is anyone at your companies going through some sort of change and big initiatives in the next 12 to 18 months? Show of hands? Yeah. If I were to do this exact presentation in 2014, 17, 20, and do you think that in 2026, if I were to say, is anyone going to be going through some big change? What do you think the answer is? Yes. And so today we're going to talk about some practices that I think are tried and true regardless of what's going on in the world. But before we do that, this is not going to be a QPS commercial. If you don't know things about QPS, you might be in the wrong lunch. I don't know. But we feel really fortunate that we get to serve a lot of different customers across the Midwest. And why I think that's really important is because we get to see some of the best practices around the country, and we get brought in to help solve problems. In fact, if you were to walk around all the different branches that we have, we kind of have a mantra that says, if we can't make our customers better at what they do, then yeah, we're just a staffing company. And I truly believe that part of our role is to help make customers better at what they do through a lot of different things. But being a thought leader and truly helping them solve their problems is important. So we're a decent sized company. We have lots of different specialties: manufacturing, warehouse, clerical, professional. We continue to invest in those things. But again, why I bring this slide up isn't about QPS. It's about that we have a fairly unique opportunity in the things that we see. And so for some of you that have had detailed business reviews, there's probably not a question that said, hey, What are you seeing in the market as far as if people are moving pay rates to this and job openings went like that? What happened to turnover? And we can't say here's what will happen to you, but hang out with me for a couple hours and I'll show you kind of the end of our data set of just how much we can look at. So I think it's really important. But I want to set like a little ground rules of kind of where we're at, and I'm using 23 and 24 as the example because these are the most recent. So I just want to click through a couple things that we're seeing in our industry that are probably affecting you. But job openings continue to be fairly high. They've clicked down a little bit, and I would love to, maybe if it's after this or if anyone wants to say, hey, here's where we're at. But we're seeing some pretty unique things. So the unemployment numbers just came out today. So this number was 3.7 yesterday. And this morning they came out and it's actually 3.9. So it is clicking up a little bit, but still at very historic lows, right? So the labor market is tight, but I'm going to show you a slide in a few minutes that actually says there's a lot of disparity with what's actually going on in the market. I think this one's kind of interesting because I feel like in 22 and 23, right, there was like the great resignation. Everyone was taking a new job to make it, a $5,000 raise or a dollar increase. There was just tons of churn in the market, which made the unemployment numbers a little depressed because when people are in transition, they don't get caught up in unemployment, but actually creates more openings, right? So you can see it. What's really interesting today, so I can't speak at all for the whole staffing industry, but it's pretty similar. We have a professional division that hires probably 350, engineering, operations, finance folks. We have a pretty good sized practice. Last year was the highest number on record of offers that were not accepted when we gave them exactly what they wanted. So, a person walks, the company talks to us and says, I really want to move from my company, my job requirements, it needs to be within 25 miles. I'd like to work for a small to mid-sized company, 85,000. If I could get a 10%, and we're like, perfect. And we find that opportunity. And then we say, congratulations. They love you, and then they're gonna make an offer to you, and here's the number. And then they go home, and they're like, yeah, I'm not going. And what we saw was two different things. Number one, talent hoarding is still a good thing. So there's like this recency effect of, no, you are not leaving. You're just making headway. Like, no, you're not leaving. And so companies are spending even more money, and that's why the HR folks are really getting frustrated. They're like, I gave you what you wanted 12 months ago. And then the other one is we think they're going home and either, husband or wife or whoever they're talking to is going, are you crazy? Like, are you reading what's going on out there? If you're the last one hired, you're gonna be the first one fired. Now, I don't have the data that says those are the exact same reason, the two reasons, but it's the highest that we have on record of we found you exactly what you wanted, and on second thought, I'm not going. And that's an interesting thing. I don't really know what the pace of change is supposed to be, but coming out of COVID, right, there was this just massive amount of change. I don't know what 24 will present, but it feels like there's still gonna be a fair amount of change. And again, what I would go back to is, if we were to do 15 and 16, 17, 18, there's always a lot of change going on. And so I think there's a fair amount of normalcy now in what rate of change is. It feels like in today's world, pay rates are stabilizing a little bit. So evidence with that, with merit increases, feel like they're at more historic levels, the 3.4 to 3.7 range, some a little bit less, some a little bit more. But I think that there is some damage that has happened, so to speak, with 22 and 23 that is, I don't know how we're gonna actually recover from that, because now when someone gets a 3% pay raise, they're like, well, I gotta, you're like, yeah, I know, and we're still trying to figure out how to pay for that, by the way. But we are starting to see some historical norms. One of the other things that we are seeing, and this one I don't know how it's going to play out, but higher pay rates sound good for the candidate in the short term, but I do believe that there's unintended consequences because we are starting to see some pockets where, let's just say that the average starting pay rate is $17 and 2 years ago it was 16, and 3 years ago it was 15. And now we have a pool of candidates that are going, I'll go work for that company for $1 less. We are starting to see pockets out there where candidates are coming to us and saying, I want to go work for this company, and you can actually pay me less than what the market rate is because it's a great company, and no companies are actually going to come out and say, we think we're overpaying. But there is an interesting phenomenon out there that I think you're going to start seeing, not necessarily deflation, but clearly the manufacturing environment and general labor has swung where there are more candidates today, which is good news for us because we can be a lot more selective. But where that shakes out, I don't know. But it's an interesting variable that we're starting to see. If any of you can predict what this one's going to be, I would love to understand what that is. I think we're going to see this play out a little bit more industry specific and trade specific, right? So I think if you're hiring a finance person or an IT person, it's pretty hard to find groups that are fully in the office. Conversely, it feels like HR is probably one of those ones that's going to be much more in the office, which kind of makes sense. You're in the people business. But where this shakes out is going to be interesting. And it feels like, 22 and 23, the employee had a lot of power, right? And it feels like in 23, 24, things were starting to shift a little bit. This one is interesting because what also goes into the labor participation rate has a couple nuances. And so it's down a click, and that sounds like such a small number, but that's a really big number when you include or extrapolate what all those things are. This is the one that I think is really interesting. So this is about 4 hours old. So I think the economy added, I saw our CFO, 275,000 jobs? Yeah. So higher, I think the government was expecting 185,000 jobs. State of the Union last night, so they added 100,000. I'm just kidding, I have no idea. That was not a political joke, it was just a joke. But exceeded on the jobs, right? But look at where it's coming from. This is what the amount of nuances we're seeing in the industry here. So the bottom one is the one that we probably look at the most. Manufacturing is down. And I think we're at many months now, I have the stats in my office, but overall manufacturing continues to be down. But the jobs report just keeps going up and up and up and up. And so there's this kind of duality of different industries acting very different. I don't totally understand the health services thing. I haven't dug into these numbers enough, but if we talk to our friends in the staffing world that does health, their business has been hit really, really hard. But I believe there's this kind of equilibrium that's happening in a lot of these things. I think everything was just over-indexed over the past 2 years. And so what does the new normal look like? I don't know. So last quick slide on just kind of some of the things that we pulled together and what's happening in the market. The slide on the left is the Indeed job openings report. Who uses Indeed in here? Did you guys all get your price increases for this year yet? No? Yeah? Big, right? It's insane. We have a meeting with them in an hour. But this is the part that I can't square. So we talked here that unemployment is up, right, to 3.9%. And we said that manufacturing is down. And if I were to look at this right here for just jobs in our sector, it's probably close to a 50% decrease in job openings. So basic math and economics would say demand is lower and supply is higher, right? And yet the unemployment market continues to suggest that it's still harder to hire. We definitely are seeing that we can provide a better candidate today, but I think the candidate market is also trying to reset. I mean, 3 years ago, this is a story that I tell because I hated this story, and it's a true story. I was in one of our offices I think I was in Iowa, and I like to just sit and talk to people that are coming in. I asked them how they found us. I like to just get to know them a little bit, and this guy came in, and everyone knew him. His name was Eric, and Eric walked in, and I introduced myself, and Eric went and talked to the recruiter, and he said, I need you to tell you that I need to take 2 weeks off. I'm going to go hang out with my sister in Arizona. And the recruiter was like, this is a temp to perm job. You know that you're going to lose your job there. And this is a really good job. He's like, I love it there. It's a really great job. And she's like, you're just going to go hang out with your sister in Arizona for 2 weeks? You're going to lose your job. And he's like, yeah, but you also have something else for me when I get back, right? And I was like, no. Tell him no. And yes, we will. Yes, we absolutely will. Like, it was like, and I'm sure that happens to you guys, right? Like, maybe not today, but a year and a half ago, like, it was a chaos. But the part that I want to transition to is, I'm not sure that any of that stuff matters. It matters in our recruiting strategies. It does matter in what we have to do for rewards. It does matter in some things and how we run the business. But I've been, I guess, in the business world and seeing kind of human resources things for probably 25 years now. And what I probably get challenged by the most is sometimes the leaders of the companies, sometimes human resources, sometimes line leaders, we will use all this data, which is super interesting, to treat employees differently based on the market. And it's not like we say when times are good, I won't say hi to you, and when times are bad, I won't, right? But I have seen companies take massive swings that said, culture's now really important to us. And it wasn't back then. Well, we're losing a lot of employees. That's a horrible reason to do it. You should do it because you believe it can affect your business. We believe that we're going to have better communication strategies. Why? Because we're losing too many people. Like, I suggest that sometimes companies do things as reaction, and I said some words up here that are little trigger words for me, are like, employees used to have all the power, and employers now have the power. I'm like, so are you supposed to do stuff with that? Or are we supposed to be a good company regardless, right? When employees had all the power, if we believe that, were you still trying to be the best? I think so, right? And when employers have a lot of the power, if that is a true statement, are you going, that's cool, I hope the company down the street's better than us? No, right? And so the reason I go through all this information to kind of set the stage for this presentation is, I think it does matter. This information that we talked about drives a lot of the economics of our business. It drives our go-to-market strategy. But then the last 20 minutes, what I'm going to talk to you about, I would suggest is it's regardless. And so for us, when we have more candidates than we know what to do with, guess what we do? We actually make sure that we talk to our candidates more than we ever have. Because guess what? Our competitors are seeing the same thing. For us candidates, more isn't always better. If we put an ad out on, I said an ad, in the Journal Sentinel, when we put an ad, geez. If we put an ad on the interwebs, and we get 2,000 candidates, which happens, and we only had 10 jobs, I actually look at that as we just kind of annoyed 1,900 people that are really important to us. And we probably aren't going to go talk to 1,900 people. So in that case, for those of us that have been doing this for more than, let's say 20 years, but I'll just use myself, I won't use Jerry as an example, but Jerry's younger than me. But when I was growing up and I was 20 years old and I wanted to go find a job, I wasn't going to say I ride my bike, but I would drive my car around, and if I could fill out 8 applications for a summer job, that was pretty good, right? I have to go find the person, I'd fill out 8 applications. And I would write them all down. I feel like 10, 15 years ago, I could probably fill out 25 applications and I could do them all online, right? but I have to go to this website and fill out an application. And today, if I wanted to go get a job for $15, $18, $20 an hour, how many jobs could I apply for in 1 hour? Hundreds. So think about what that shift has done, right? We have asked candidates and we have asked for technology to say, we want the broadest reach as we can. And then you listen to LinkedIn stuff and they're like, you should never apply for a job, it's a horrible candidate experience. Well, you applied to 180 jobs, dude. But I think sometimes we put that on ourselves. And so what I want to talk to you about in this next kind of 15 minutes or so is, what do we need to do as employers to control the narrative around change? And so we all said that we're going through some version of change, right? And I think there's three main areas that I always think about. And by the way, every time I do a lot of different speaking things on a lot of different topics, but please don't ever think that QPS is perfect at these things. This is how Ryan leads and he's amazing at this. This is also a reminder and therapy for me of best practices, but these are a lot of things that I've learned, some through successes and some failures. But I feel like having leadership clarity is the starting point. Every single person that works for your company is looking for some type of clarity. And I think sometimes we confuse that with positivity versus clarity. They just want clarity. And I'll talk a little bit more on why that's important and some of the things that you can do to drive that clarity. The second thing is engagement. I mean, a lot of these go hand in hand, but engagement is such I'd say an overused word. And we measure for it. A lot of us do surveys, right? But I boil it down to just a very simple thing. And do you feel engaged? Why do you feel engaged? It still amazes me the amount of folks that don't think this is a competitive advantage, right? You hear the different phrases of people don't leave their company, or they leave their company, leave their boss. I would also argue there's lots of steps within that, because I've worked for some pretty bad bosses but super engaged in the company because I was surrounded by people that knew it was important and I knew that there was clarity. But I think the last one, and this is an important leadership trait, I would say, and a style, is creating a culture of vulnerability and transparency. That's a lot of how I'm wired. I know this isn't necessarily natural for a lot of folks, but I think that being very open and vulnerable with your people is really high. I actually was at a off-site meeting yesterday with a group that I'm in for my development, and we had he was an outside speaker, and he was amazing, and his whole topic was actually around risk. And I went to this thing thinking that risk was going to be about risk profiles and how to mitigate risk as a company, and it had some of that. But one of the key topics, which I guess I knew intuitively, I never connected it, was if you want innovation in your company, and if you want people to feel the ability to try something new, which is a little bit of a code word for take a little bit of a risk, you're never going to do that if you don't have a culture of vulnerability and transparency. And there's actually statistical correlation that says if people feel safe, and people usually feel safe when they can be vulnerable and transparent and their boss creates that, your ability to drive innovation, take risks, significantly goes up. And I won't steal any of this guy's stuff because I won't do it justice, but it was a really cool day for me yesterday because it's something that I believe in, but I didn't understand the actual statistical relevance between people feeling safe because they can be vulnerable, their manager can be vulnerable, and how that has a one-to-one relationship on their ability to drive change and risk. So let's talk a little about leadership clarity. So I came to QPS, in June it'll be 5 years, but you're close, Jerry, I appreciate it. Jerry's the only one that knows my actual hire date.
June 24th.
June 24th, thanks Jerry, I knew it was June. But I came to a company, and if you want to look at the board over here, that has had a very strong track record of success. And it was also a company that was starting to flatline a little bit on growth and what that looks like. And I will tell you that coming into a company at a leadership level where you kind of hear this like, hey, you need to change. And hey, Ryan, look at the scoreboard. We were doing pretty good since you got here. Those are some challenging things to deal with. And one of the things that I love to do is just have a lot of clarity about the past. So with any of us that have children, and I were to say, let's talk to me about your kids when they're 2 years old, and here's their nicknames, you're gonna show me some funny videos, like it's just all amazing, right? We usually don't say, tell me the worst night that you had, and did you ever spend the whole night up and you had to, deal with a sick child? Like, we don't talk about those things because those weren't quote unquote the good old days. So for me, it's really important to have a lot of celebration and clarity about the past. We should celebrate those things. I mean, there are hundreds of things that QPS did that were innovative, amazing. And then there's also some things that people sometimes forget because they're not part of the good old days. One of the things that happened about 2.5 years ago was we had a location, don't even know where it was, no, I knew where it was, that wasn't performing. And we have 55 locations. We've opened a lot of locations in the past few years. And it happens, right? We're gonna close this location, it stinks, it didn't work like we thought. And there was a lot of pressure that I felt and that other people felt, like they're gonna be really, like the owners and the founders, like, oh my gosh, you failed, you screwed it up and all that kind of stuff. And so I went to one of the historians, so to speak, and I said, can you pull a list of all of the locations that we've opened and closed in the past 35 years? And I was expecting to see like 5 or 6 or 7. It was a lot more than that. Markets change, right? Employment changes. There's a lot that happens. And it's not that we're like proud to close a location. If it doesn't work, you have to understand that and move on. But the point is, the recency effect of what I felt was like, we've never failed. No, that's never happened. But we've grown significantly over the past 35 years. That's what you hear, right? But I do think it's important to have a lot of clarity about the past and get folks to talk about how they remember it, and then ask really good questions of where you've been that they may not want to talk about as obvious. For me, I always talk about the good old days, right? But it takes someone asking me some really tough questions going, tell me what's the worst part about that. And you can start drilling into those things. But I think if you don't respect the past, good luck on getting someone to understand the future. For me, the future doesn't always have to be perfect, and clear doesn't have to be precise. And so I think there's a really big difference between talking to your employees about, we are definitely going here. So as an example, if I were to say we are going to be growing, we're going to be growing organically through these disciplines, we're going to be investing in this technology, we're going to be doubling down on professional, when we think that skilled is going to be here for the next 10 years. I don't know how to do it all yet, I'm not sure. And I can be incredibly clear on both sides of that. I can talk to the whole company about, we are absolutely making investments in this, and we are absolutely going here. And when someone says how, I'm pretty close on most of them, but I think it's so important to talk about what you don't know. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. Number 1, as a leader, you can show vulnerability. I think some people are always expecting the leaders to have the answer, and if at least the folks at our company knew how many answers I didn't know, they might be a little scared. But I think it's okay. And I think you gain a lot of credibility with teams when you can talk to them about what you know and also what you don't know. And the second part is, I need your help in filling in the blanks. I'm gonna work with you, I'm gonna work with your team. I'm gonna really use the knowledge that's in this room. I'm gonna use the knowledge in the industry. But I can tell you we're headed this direction. I don't know exactly what route, I don't know exactly what the investment is, but we're headed there. Can I have your help in doing that? But I think understanding that clarity is important. I think when you're driving engagement, I try to think about this in the categories of what is leadership's role, what is human resources role, and what's the employee's role. I think the first one is fairly understood. It's very difficult to drive change without the leaders being on board. But I think I'm going to combine that with the second one. And so I did human resources for a very long time. I watched a lot of things happen very successfully, and I watched a lot of things crash and burn. And one of the biggest things that I learned is that human resources folks, me included, start with supply. All right, if I were to say, hey, do you have a talent management practice and how you want to run succession planning? You're like, yeah, this is how we should do it. And I would argue that's supply. Most leaders need to understand the why. Is that really important? So with engagement, my sense is if I were to ask everyone in the room right now, what are the 3 things that this department needs to do to drive engagement? They're like, oh, they need to do this, and by the way, you're probably right. But I'm not sure we always create the demand with the leader of why it's important. And I think sometimes what happens is when we have the answers before they realize they need it, they actually go the other way and they shut down. And so the best human resources folks that I've seen in their roles is they create demand. And they already have the supply right here. Like, I already know what I'm going to work with this person on, but I really have to make sure that I create demand. Because nothing is worse than creating a program that leadership doesn't accept. Sometimes we have to use that with data. Sometimes we have to have some very, very challenging conversations. Sometimes we have to go over their head. We could do a whole hour on influence. But I would suggest that the human resources role and how they approach change can make the leader's role either less or less receptive. So I think it's a really important thing in human resources. And I think the last one is, does the employee play a role? And we're going to talk about that, about can they affect change. I think sometimes we ask our employees to go on a journey with us, which is really good. But I think sometimes we can include them even more on taking the co-pilot seat and sometimes even the pilot seat, as long as we have a good map and a direction where we're headed. So areas of engagement for me is this employee first mentality and truly believing that employees can drive change. I think innately we all think that they can, but I would suggest that they can affect more change than we give them credit for. And I'm going to use the reverse example. Is there anyone in any of your buildings where there's like 3 or 4 people that you're like, they're nasty, they have a negative impact on the rest of the group, I don't trust them, they're always trying to undermine me? Probably not. We don't have any of those. But does anyone have any of those in their company? We all do, right? So do those folks affect change? 1,000%. It happens to be the wrong change, but they do. And I truly believe that when you can create that same type of engagement, theirs just happens to be, they're super engaged just in something you don't want them to be engaged in, right? But they're supporting each other, they're just on the wrong team that happen to work in your building, and hopefully you have a strategy for that. But you have to believe they can drive change. The second is creating a culture of listening. I think we all like that. We all say, no, we like that. We have a suggestion box. We do listening sessions. We go on the floor and we talk to people. And I think sometimes we then get bit a little bit, right? There's no good deed that ever goes unpunished. I firmly believe that. Every time in my life, I'm like, that was great. I'm like, somehow I got bit on that one. But it happened 2 weeks ago for me. We're rolling out, we're gonna have another thing called Pillars, which we've had for a while. It's our customer, community, co-owners, and candidate. And so the marketing team did an awesome job. They mocked it up, and here's a couple different thoughts. Here's some colors. We use words. And I was talking to this person. I said, "What do you think?" And she said, "Well, I don't like this. I think we should do that." And I went back a day or two later and I said, we've talked to a bunch of folks on the team. I think we're actually going to go this direction. And this person who I admire and respect, they're like, well, then why'd you even ask me? And my response was, I asked your opinion. I didn't ask you what we should do. But I think that happens a lot, right? Is when we ask people and then they're like, well, now I'm disenfranchised because you asked my opinion, you didn't do what I said. I'm like, no, you have to set this up stage. This isn't a democracy, by the way. I want you to be engaged. And by the way, I have a whole bunch of other folks that I'm going to ask in their opinion. And this isn't also a majority rule, but I as a leader want to make sure I understand, are you receptive to where we're going? And if you don't agree with it, I need to know that. I'd rather know that you disagree. And over time, I'm going to work with you on saying, here's where we're going. Because the third thing on the 360 feedback loop is really important. Call it a hunch. I make a lot of mistakes. I do. We go after a lot of things and not everything works. But I think when you can stand in front of your employees and say, here's where we're headed, here's what we're doing, there's just as much power in coming back the next month or 2 months or 2 years, whatever it was, and said, you know what, we tried, we put everything behind it. I need to tell you, it didn't work. Guess what? They know it didn't work. They thought it was stupid. And sometimes you can give them credit going like, yeah. And so maybe we would have done the same thing, or maybe we got it 70% right, and here's the adjustments that we're going to be making. But I wanted you to know that I asked you to go on the journey with me. Thank you. We're still on that journey, and I wanted to tell you that that didn't work. I think sometimes leaders have a really hard time with saying that because wrong equals bad. And I mean, if you're going after 7 or 8 things, if you got them all right, you're actually not going after all the right things. You're not either being aggressive enough, you're not doing enough. But I think telling your folks what didn't work is really important. For us, we're 100% employee owned. That happened in May of 2020. I'm looking at the board. And that has been a big, I guess, just added level of engagement for us, because we literally can now tell people, like, is that a good investment for the company because we're all owners? But I truly believe that engaged people, really do care about the place and making sure that they treat it as if it's their own. Vulnerability and transparency I talked to you about is something that I think is just really important. As I mentioned, I think you gain credibility with folks by telling them when it's wrong. We have a little bit of a mantra here that we are going to fail at some things. Hopefully it's cheap. But recognizing the behavior that you want to see is important. And we need to lead by example. So we had our leadership meeting in here a couple days ago from around the Midwest. Our leaders came in. And it's important for me to demonstrate to the team that we are going to be innovative. And so every single person in the group had to come up with, we did this in January when we started the year off, here's the innovative behavior thing that I'm doing in the company. Here's how I'm going to measure it, and here's my accountability partner that we're going to work on. And we update each other every 3 months formally of what is the thing that we're working on. And what's beautiful about that is there's some sense when you share with the rest of the group of, hey, that's a super cool idea they're working on, and I'm going to jump on that one. Or, I need to tell you mine's just not working, I'm behind, whatever that is. But recognizing that behavior. And for us, we use, there's lots of different tools to do this, but we encourage a lot of our folks on our intranet. We use Yammer, there's lots of different ways to do it. But just rewarding that simple behavior can go a really long way. And I think the last part of this is just breaking this barrier that vulnerability equals weakness. I think that us being vulnerable is something that will actually drive strength. Our business has lots of challenges, lots of rewarding things. And one of our leaders said the other day, we had a challenging thing that happened a couple weeks ago, and they're like, I would have been scared to bring this to the group. And now we're not like celebrating that we failed this little pocket, but I also think it's going like, I need the team to rally around me, and I think the team is probably more engaged than they've ever been because they can talk through the fact that here's what went wrong and here's what we're going to fix it. The last thing that I would just leave you with in this category is that I'm not sure the golden rule is always the right thing. Does anyone know what the platinum rule is? Yeah. So the golden rule is treat others as you would like to be treated, right? And the platinum rule is treat others as they would like to be treated. And we have very complex workforces, but I think if we start with the fact that we are going to be incredibly programmatic and we're going to follow the exact same thing, I think we're missing an opportunity. That doesn't mean we're going to be able to do everything perfect, but how do you make sure that you create equity which isn't necessarily equality? We're going to reward behaviors. It doesn't mean we're going to do the same thing in the plant as we are at corporate, but we are going to create the same culture of behaviors. And yes, it's going to show up differently, but how do we have an equitable program? Allowing small wins to rule. We had a super fun exercise at our leadership meeting. So we just got this new technology in this room because we are now having these types of meetings. And so the TV behind you just looks like a regular TV. It's got a little camera on it. And we did something that was super fun. So we've got folks all over, whatever. And we literally went around the room and we're like, who's doing something cool in the branches right now that we want to recognize? And there's amazing stories. And so we were literally like, dial them up. And we had 25 people with our room, our leaders, and it was super fun. So 25 of the leaders in the company, it's the leadership of the company. And all of a sudden on Teams it pops up and this person's like, what is happening? I see Ryan, I see Jerry, I see my boss's boss, what is happening? And it was literally just like, hey, I just want to tell you I heard a cool story. You did this, this, and this. And they're like, their heads exploded. It took 3 minutes. It was free. It was fun. And I think it creates this culture of just, these little things do matter. And by the way, someone else heard about it. I'm going to tell a really quick story. This is my last slide. At my old company, really big company, one of the CEOs that we had was super charismatic, but not always, the person that's going to be out on the floor and talking to everybody. And we were having some challenges with engagement and communication. And so I happened to be in the HR leader's office when the CEO came in, and this sucks, this person's doing this, how come we can't do this? And somehow it was an engagement conversation, which it really wasn't. But I said to him, hey, can I ask you to do something that's I know you're not going to want to do this, but can you just humor me? So the corporate office had, 4,000 people in it. And I said, I'm going to have you call one person at corporate, and I'm going to give you the story of what they did, and I'm going to give you one person at the stores, and I want you to call them and simply, you could read it. I heard that you did an amazing job on this project. I heard that it did this, 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 and this, and I just wanted you to know that I heard about it and I thought it was amazing. He was so angry. He's like, it's disingenuous. I don't know them. I don't like it. It's exactly the opposite of what I want to do. And I was like, I promise you, I'll hear about both those stories from 5 different people by the end of the day. He did it, and it went viral before it was viral. They're telling everyone, Larry Montgomery, what's his name? Larry just called me. You are never going to believe what he told me. It's like, Larry, guess what? They know you don't know them. They know you don't know what you're talking about. The fact that it made it to your desk is an unbelievable thing. And the reason I tell you that story is I think sometimes we miss opportunities to take very small things and actually make them, so to speak, go viral. People will tell great stories. And so I think, as we talk about what we need to do as leaders, as human resources folks, or whatever your role is, it doesn't matter what's going on in the economy. It doesn't matter what's going on with jobs. We can go through all the different stats. I have no idea what's going to happen the rest of this year. But I do know that us creating this culture of engagement and listening and having folks be part of change is something that you'll never regret doing. So that's all I have. Would love if anyone has any questions, things you disagree with. That's okay too. I'm wrong a lot, like I said. Would love to spend a few minutes if any have those. Now, I'm guessing some of you have an internal rule that says if I'm off-site past 1 or 2, then I don't have to go back to the office. If it's before 1, I technically do. So whatever you guys decide to do, I'll sign yours. I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. Anyone have any questions or comments? Yeah.
Did you give an example of the equity versus equality? You mentioned you might have different rewards or the shop versus the plan.
Yeah.
That's what we struggle with sometimes.
Going into the umbrella of no good deed goes unpunished, and I think about any program that you want to do. Sometimes we don't do things because we don't know how we're going to solve for the group, the plant, or the one down the street. And I guess so I could go through a million examples of, does free food here mean free food everywhere? No, we can't afford, but a corporate office environment might show up different than this. But what I have found to be the best thinking around that is not to try to convince someone that, you get this budget and that budget and they get free food and you only get snacks. Is, if you want to apply for one of those jobs, you can. Absolutely. Like for us, we have our sales folks and we have our ops folks, and how they, their schedules and how they get compensated and all. We're all human beings. Well, how come they get that? I'm like, yeah, we have a branch manager opening if you wanted to do that. That'd be cool. Or sales, we actually have a sales opening if you wanted. Well, I don't want that. That's cool. This is the program that we are doing for that. And again, I just try really hard not to hide behind something, and just, honesty is usually pretty efficient too. And that doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with you, but I truly believe that people would rather disagree with what you're saying than have an imagination of what they think you mean. And so again, I think it's one of the challenges of why we don't do things is because we don't know how to make it equal. And I would suggest it's never going to be equal, but there should be equity, meaning this isn't going to show up this way or